From the museum in Washington, D.C., this is Power to the Interns, the student view. Our experts now are going to be led by the students who have been interns. Let me start. Tell us about your internship experience.
So I started out, I interned at a small publication in Colorado and was actually covering Capitol Hill for them. And then last summer I was at a really large news organization, and since September I've been at the Washington Post.
Okay, so Shira, how were you prepared as an intern when you came on board? How did it differ from internship to internship?
Yeah, so the small news organization, I went to the newsroom physically in my first couple of days there, and we didn't really do any training or onboarding. It was, here's the people you'll be working with, here's the town, so you can kind of have an idea of what you'll be covering. But there wasn't any really onboarding or training or anything like that. The second one had a really heavy onboarding and training. That was a really well fleshed out summer intern program, and so I was getting the full onboarding that all the other regular employees were getting. I was having seminars on a regular basis with other interns, getting to meet lots of people from around the company and having those kinds of discussions. And then at the Post, I did their orientation as well. Less of the conversations later, but that's just because my internship's kind of unusual there.
And in any of these situations, did your preparation as an intern include any conversation about sexual harassment?
Not to my memory. It might have happened at the larger news organization last summer, but I don't think so. I can't remember any time where I've had that conversation on an institutional level with anyone officially. So
Cordelia, knowing what we know now about the Me Too movement, what would you think as the intern or the early hire you would like to know in terms of preparation?
I think that what I would like to know is a little bit about what kinds of things do I need to say. It seems as though it was emphasized a lot that you should be able to speak up in some of these situations, and sometimes that's a whole lot harder than sometimes it can make out to be, because sometimes you don't know what the outcome will be in the end. But maybe if perhaps we continue to have these kinds of conversations, not just starting with training at the beginning and then just totally forget about it, but if you continuously go through what kinds of things can I say, so that way if I am put in that situation, I at least have a starting point of how to introduce myself into that.
So you're both from American University, where your director of your school has been with us, and she has talked about how they have tried to introduce this into the curriculum. So it's starting at the university level. Do you think that's a good idea, and how could that be better?
Absolutely. I took an ethics course last semester, and we actually discussed the Me Too movement and all of it from the perspective of not only how would we cover it, but also how would we handle it? How would we be in the newsroom if that kind of thing happened to us, because as it is happening to so many women. And then they're having these conversations. I wasn't able to attend it, but as they said on the last panel, Tracy Grant was able to come and talk to students at our university about how to handle those kinds of things. And they're working on it. It's something that's been happening more in this current semester, a little bit towards the end of last semester, as the Me Too movement has grown. But I think it's something that they can continue improving on and continue working with.
Yeah, and I believe the university has started to implement some of these programs from the beginning. So a lot of freshmen are starting to get more of these kinds of conversations and this kind of preparation for this. And I feel the fact that the university is doing that is so important, because it allows it to reach all different kinds of students. Those who are in SOC and might be aspiring to be in the newsroom someday, but then also those people who are looking to have careers in the workplace elsewhere.
Gloria Riviera, we have heard from some younger women that there's a little bit of anger that those of us who preceded them, who even experienced sexual harassment and got through it, didn't do enough to stop it. Are you seeing a generational divide here, and what can we do about it?
That's an interesting question. I haven't thought about that one before. I see, when I have conversations with young women, mostly they are women, but of course this applies to men as well, in my own workplace, there is a little bit of disbelief. Oh, you had to deal with that? I actually have been encouraged, because I think these young people today have very little tolerance for anything inappropriate. They're so full of fire and determination. However, there's always someone in every group that comes along that has experienced something so significant, they haven't felt that they have the voice to speak up. So you asked about anger. Did we not do enough?
Our whisper networks took care of each other, right?
Right. I believe the Whisper Network was the first step. We're getting to where we need to be, but in my own experience, I was able at the time to share my experience with others. I think that was the first step in terms of creating some momentum and creating some power. And now the question is, what do we do with that momentum and power?
We go back to the Whisper Network. So Lisa or Maya, both of you, when someone would say to an intern, watch out for so-and-so, you know, he's kind of a ladies' man, or he's a little, what we said was handsy, what should their reaction be?
I think that they should pay attention. I also think to the extent that you have a supervisor, an intern coordinator, or someone you can talk with if you don't already have experience. You've talked about some of the information that your college has given you about how to address that. And also as a lawyer, depending on the identity and the role of the individual who told you that, the company may be officially and legally on notice of the harassment and therefore have a legal responsibility to do something about it. I also just want to make the point, I understand this panel is about harassment and other forms of unlawful discrimination at work, that every single person in this room and on this panel hopes that you and all of your friends at school have a positive and a productive work relationship with everyone you work with from your first job all the way up to your retirement. But it is important that you know what to do if a problem arises, or if one of your friends or family members has a problem, that you know that you have options.
How do you do this all without scaring people? I mean, I really worry that we're talking about this and it may cause you to say, I don't know if I want to go into that workplace if it's going to be that creepy.
I was just going to say, unfortunately, as we've heard over the last several months, this is a problem in every workplace. It's not particular to the media or to newsrooms. But I think what we're seeing is people feeling empowered to come forward and speak up when they do see something that's happening that in a way that people haven't necessarily before on this scale. And I think that's absolutely critical. And whether it's just a simple fact of talking to someone else and knowing that you're not the only one this is happening to, for a lot of people, validates that experience. Like, I'm not crazy, I'm not just imagining this, and that is very, very empowering and builds a lot of power. Obviously, we have also been talking about how it can't just be on the students to come forward. There's a lot of system change that has to happen, but I think that has been very, very critical and empowering.
I absolutely agree with that. Talking to a former student who is now in a pretty good-sized market and was talking about her experience, she echoed something that we heard at the Power Shift Summit, which was the importance of, one way or another, documenting what was happening to you. When you think something is off, whether it's an email to self or having a conversation with a girlfriend or somebody else, even if you're not talking to people within the workplace, because the reporting that was done on these big stories all started with their ability to go back and document, yes, she talked to me. Yes, she talked to me too. Yes, she was concerned. She was crying. All those things were there. And even if it's just a note to self, file to self, so you can go back and look at it later and then talk to somebody else, you have the basis to review what happened and take a look at it and say, is this really what I thought it was? The am I crazy conversation. Am I crazy conversations are vital for you to put things in proper perspective.
And hang on to those notes and don't delete if it's a text message, if it's a picture. Not that you have to have that to file a charge or make a complaint internally, but hang on to everything, whether or not you decide to complain or not.
One of my students told me about an internship that she had had in the past, and they were in a group chat, and one of the people in the group chat didn't know she was on it, and up came the conversation, who's going to bang the intern? And that's the kind of thing. But the problem for her was there was no HR where she worked. It was a small, tight working group, and she had no one to go to, so she had to try to navigate that herself. And I think those are the kind of situations that we need to help prepare people for.
Right. And I think that's a situation where the university and the school, if it's an internship situation, can be a really critical resource.
And I mean, that is the aim of Press Forward, is to be a place to go to. And our mission is to get to as many young men and women as possible to say, this is where you can come to learn about what you need to learn about to be safe in the workplace. And I'll tell you, of our founding members, several young women left the news business because they were disheartened by the experiences that they had while at their place of work. And fortunately, they went on to be rock stars in a wide array of different industries.
But we lost them.
But news lost them. And they had dreams of becoming journalists and reporters and continuing in this business. And I think that's so sad to me. And so what we say, and it can sound a little bit idealistic, but if you are in a place of business and you don't feel you can go speak up if something has happened, that's not the place that you should be. And it's not going to be the place that's going to support you the way that you deserve and need to be supported to do your best work.
Shira, you said you've had training as an active bystander. Yeah. And you've actually had to use it lately, not in a harassment situation, but can you share it with us? And tell us a little bit about what active bystander is.
Yeah, so active bystander training is talking about not just watching something happen, actually interact with it in a way that is safe for both you and the person who is being harassed. So last night I was in Georgetown going to get a hamburger. I was tired, it had been a long work day, and I just wanted to eat. And this woman was working at the burger place and she was behind the counter, and I walked in and this man who had just bought something was yelling at her, and I don't know what he was yelling about, but I had this moment of, do I say something? I'm a young woman, it's night, I'm probably gonna take public transportation home, do I wanna risk my own personal safety? But I thought about, okay, bright restaurant, lots of people here, and I said something. I said, sir, you need to stop harassing her, she's at her job, it isn't okay for you to keep yelling at her. And then he tried to yell at me. I mostly ignored it, but I was shaking afterward. It was still a little bit scary, and I decided to take a cab home because I didn't want to risk my own personal safety because maybe he was standing outside the restaurant when I was leaving.
But having had the training, you felt better prepared?
Absolutely, absolutely. If you know what you're supposed to say and do in the moment, it helps so much more if you've practiced it. It's why as journalists we go to school, we practice interviewing people. It makes you feel more comfortable talking to strangers. And it's the same thing. You practice active bystander intervention and you know what to do when you go into that situation.
It's also why, as a person who trains managers, I do sessions on tough conversations on how to talk about difficult things in the workplace. But we haven't had these practice sessions. And I did one recently with students in my ethics class, and Gloria's agreed to do it with me so you can practice at home. How do you respond if someone is touching you? You've got somebody who you've said is handsy, which, by the way, we decided at the Power Shift we would stop saying handsy, and every time you heard it, say the word molesty instead, because it isn't quite as cute if you use that, right? So I'm going to get molesty with you, and we're going to see how this goes. So I'm just a person who just loves to, when I'm talking with this really bright young woman, I'm just going to say, Gloria, listen, let's talk a second.
Can we just have this conversation without your hand on me, thanks? And that's just off the top of my head, you know, and as I said it, I actually felt uncomfortable for saying it a little bit.
Yeah. And yet practicing it makes it seem a little easier. We did it literally in my ethics class because we were doing a session on sexual harassment as a case study. And with the permission of one of the students, I did the same thing. So may I put my hand on your arm to practice this? All right. So Cordelia, let's talk a little bit. You know, you're really a good student. You do such a good job here. And I just want to tell you that you really have really attractive hair.
May you please, can we not touch each other during this?
Okay. Do you have a problem with me?
Yes, I don't like it when people violate my personal space. We can still have this conversation, but I think it's better to keep it professional and not touch my hair.
Okay, Lynn and Shira, your turn.
I love the things you were saying about what you did at the burger place. It's just be so.
You know what? I don't like people touching me. It just makes me feel uncomfortable. Do you mind not doing that?
Oh, I didn't mean anything by it.
No, absolutely. I personally don't like people touching me without my permission.
Well, okay, it's going to be like that.
And in your own way right now, Lynn, you've paid tribute to a great mentor and influence in your life. You want to tell her story?
One of my dearest friends was Gwen Eiffel. She would tell the story about when she was doing an internship at the Boston Herald American when she was at Simmons College. She went to the Xerox machine at one point, and there was a note there that said, "Inward, go home." Gwen, being Gwen, and with her background, looked at it and said, I wonder who this is for, and took it to her supervisor and laid it on the desk. The supervisor had immediate idea who did this because she was the only woman of color and probably the only person of color as an intern that summer. In their upset and not knowing what to do with this and knowing that they couldn't bring the guy to her to apologize because it would be outing him, they offered her a job. So she got the job at the end of that summer. She tells that story to say that you're going to have to deal with these situations, but there are ways to handle it and just call it for what it is.
So, Jill, I have a question. You know, I think it's important to acknowledge in this conversation and this modeling that those interactions are going to happen with people with different levels of power in the workplace. And I'm interested to know whether what you say in that moment and your reaction is different or calibrated depending on whether it's another intern, you know, touching you or saying things to you, it's sort of a manager, or, you know, it's sort of the high leadership of an organization, right? And whether, you know, and it's not unreasonable to expect that you would change how you react, but just curious to know and hear your thoughts about that.
Yeah, I think that, and even just in this moment, I know that we like rehearsed it and everything, but I do feel as though if I were to be in a newsroom and I'm like with another intern, it'd be so much easier for him to just be like, yeah, like, you know, back off or be like really casual with it. But the higher in the ranks that you go, it does become a little more, okay, if this is like the managing editor of a news organization speaking about it or like touching me in that way, then it would make me feel as though I should not like object to them, because since they are at this high level, that perhaps this is the way that.
So who would you go to talk to then?
If not the managing editor?
Who would, if you didn't feel in the moment that that would be the best option, what could you do afterwards, and who could you go talk to? Tracy Grant, right? Tracy Schweikert. You know, there is someone you can talk to. You can find the Gloria.
Yeah. I mean, I think what's so critical about what we're all acknowledging is that the higher the level, the greater the degree of tolerance for bad behavior. That is the structure that we're currently trying to break out of. So you feel more uncomfortable because that person has more power over you. So when you say, I mean, those feelings of when you say something, we as women and men, I've spoken to both who have told me about these consistent feelings. We feel like we're being rude, that it's uncomfortable, we don't want to offend the person, and that is the dynamic that needs to be flipped on its head. So whomever it is, am I going to make this person mad? Will I get in trouble? Will I lose something? Those are all the thoughts going through our minds, and there has to be someone you can go to immediately to say something, even if it's a colleague your own age. I mean, for the other intern, it's like, back off, buddy, but you're not going to use that language and be as strong with someone who's in a high position of power.
Or if you did, more power to you. Right. But I also think that your story goes, we've talked in other sessions and a little bit in this one about words. It's not just people who touch you uncomfortably at work. It's the language that's used. It's any conduct that makes you feel uncomfortable and legally is based on a protected characteristic and is severe or pervasive enough to be unlawful harassment. So it really, there is a whole spectrum of behavior.
And I mean, going back to earlier talking to people who you feel comfortable, I mean, I'm so lucky that I have two amazing female editors that are editing me and mentoring me through my experience at the Post. But not everybody has that, and I think, again, we talk about representation within media. That's why it's so important, because as they were talking about the last panel, if you have someone who looks like you to go and talk to them, who may have experienced something that you are currently experiencing, it's so much easier.
Right. if it's someone who looks like you or someone who shares your values. Right. You know, if you're working with someone like Brent Jones, who was in our previous session, you know, based on his reputation, that he's going to be an advocate for you. Or, you know, and that's, I think, the other thing is finding out, don't you want to be the person who's known as the ally in the organization? I always teach managers that the leader's language is the newsroom's style book. So if you've got someone in power who is saying things that are inappropriate, vulgar, sexually charged, it's going to send a message that that's normative behavior. And you can't necessarily, as an intern, topple that person, but you have allies who might, in fact, go on your behalf to talk to the people in power.
I think what you're saying is so important, and it goes also to something that's very common throughout newsrooms, and it's a little bit controversial. I know how I feel about it, but it's the anonymous hotline. Just call this anonymous hotline. And to me that says, because it can still be a secret, we still shouldn't really be talking about it. So, you know, just, you don't have to say your name, you don't know who's on the other end of the phone or what you're told what's happening. It's something that I think better than nothing and okay, but emblematic of the way we think about this.
What do you think, let me go to our experts in law, about anonymous hotlines? How effective have they been?
You know, I think there's certainly a range, but I would say the more complaint opportunities an organization has, the better. And certainly larger organizations may have more resources and more complaint mechanisms. To the extent an intern or a worker at any level just doesn't feel comfortable for whatever reason going to HR, following the steps that are set forth in the complaint procedure in terms of going to a specific office or individual, calling a complaint hotline is better than nothing. But the flip side is, from the employer perspective, it's really important to ensure that these hotlines are being listened to and that complaints are being addressed promptly and effectively. And certainly it can be difficult from the employer perspective if it is a hotline or a message line where people don't give enough information to investigate. But to the extent that there is something to go on, really ensuring that those complaints are treated just like any complaint made to a member of HR or to a management individual.
And I would just add, it's important that the tip line not be the only system for addressing complaints, and that I think it's also helpful in terms of establishing the credibility of the tip line as a legitimate place to make a complaint, that there's some transparency around it, right? That people understand maybe it's a periodic report to the employees. Oh, you know, every 6 months we received this many complaints through the tip line, but only 10 in HR. This is telling us something, and, you know, making a commitment to the employees, we're going to do better, and this is what we're going to do. One
of the other recommendations was to do debriefs at the end of an internship, because it is possible that you've kept something inside. You thought, I don't know if it's me, maybe I was just being overly sensitive, but you have that one last opportunity to debrief. Have either of you had an opportunity through internships or jobs to have a debrief and when it ended?
Yes, I was able to have 2 debriefs. One of them was like a large group with all of the interns together with everyone in the newsroom to just discuss and like go over everything and how the experience was. And then I also had another like pretty much debrief with my supervisor and my editor. So we could just like kind of talk about it ourselves too.
And you?
Yeah, and at my internship last summer, I was able to have a debrief with actually the bureau chief. So he sat down with every single news intern at the end of the summer and heard not just, you know, what may have happened personally, but what did you think about your experience here? How was your internship? Did you like the stories you got to write? And it was really valuable. I hadn't had that experience before, and it really made me feel like I was valued as part of their team.
And knowing, as I believe you said to me earlier, that these are extended job interviews, right? An internship is really an extended job interview. How comfortable would you be now? Is this something else you have to practice in that conversation, to say, I think you need to pay attention to a few people who are saying a few things about the relative hotness of interns, or telling us what outfits they liked that we wore today? Maybe it didn't rise to the threshold of you weren't sure that you couldn't work with this person, but you would have preferred they didn't do that.
I have a job at that internship that I was at last summer lined up for after graduation, and that's one of the reasons I chose to return, is because they were so good about making me feel like I could tell them anything that I wanted to. And I think that's so important for so many interns to have that kind of trust within the newsroom, but also feeling that they are valued and that their opinions are valued. And I think those are the best kind of internships that people can have.
And your expectations. You should
Absolutely.
expect to
Yes.
work in a safe environment, and that's what they provided.
Lynn, you work with graduate students, and somehow I think we may think that they're even less in need of protection than because, you know, they're older. But is there really a difference?
I really don't think so. Throughout our curriculum, they have at least 2 internships, and that would be separate from their experience when they come to Washington. Yet a lot of times they have not worked in these types of environments before. Once they get into these environments, they can be overwhelmed, as you well know. It's just trying to do the work in and of itself. And separate from trying to absorb the culture of the organization, because you don't have that much time. You're also in class, and you're doing you have other academic responsibilities. So I think that no matter who it is, and whether they've had experience in other workplaces before, some of my graduate students did not come straight from undergrad, obviously. You still need to have that kind of support, because this conversation is new. This is a shift, as we were saying. And even they may have had uncomfortable relationships or situations in previous work environments, and now we're here to support them to have a more positive experience going forward. And I also I'd like to add about finding allies within the workplace. It is clearly you're going to gravitate toward people who seem to have things in common with you, gender, appearance, etc. But don't sleep on the other people around you. You can be very disappointed by thinking that you'll have an ally in another woman, and suddenly you'll find out it's the guy over in the corner who really has your back. Be a good reporter about your environment so that you can see who you can go to.
I think that's such a good point, because for every story that we have about women who have been harassed, we also know stories about women who have been blessedly mentored by some wonderful men. And so you can't make that assumption. Well, I want to turn the power truly around to the two of you and put you on the spot, but I hope not too much on the spot, to give advice. Let's start with universities, then we'll go to employers, then we'll go to other students, okay? So first, what is your advice, both of you, to universities for how they should be preparing interns for their jobs?
I'm going to reiterate something that I mentioned a little bit earlier about like just the universities and their involvement. It's just to continue to address these issues all throughout the semester and all throughout the school year. Make sure that it's like still fresh in people's minds, and not just something that it's great. It's like a great start to like have like prepare people before they even enter the university. But I've had friends and other colleagues mention to me how they'll even like make it kind of like a joke, just like, oh, that's something that we do earlier on, but no one really cares, no one really listens. But it's like being able to continue involving students in this conversation, like an ongoing one, so that way it just becomes second nature.
So it's embedded, it's not just on career night, it's a part of course conversation, and it may be something that's even done in new student orientation.
And I think I'm actually an RA on campus, and I think it's something, conversations we need to be having continuously. It's not just going to a panel on campus, it's not just discussing it in your classroom. It's on the floor with the people that you live, it's the people that you interact with every day. I mean, I've had these conversations within clubs that I'm involved in. It's important to allow students to have the space to talk about it and to explore it, and not to put down people's not having knowledge about it.
What advice do you have for employers?
I would say definitely make allyship something that everyone would want to do. Because I've seen some occasions where there will be that one ally, and that person really means like oh so very much, especially to me. But at the same time, if they're like the only voice out there, then it can kind of get drowned out with everything else.
Sure.
So being able to emphasize and like kind of like have these kinds of discussions with other people in the newsroom and other people in the workplace, and allow them to learn in the importance of why we need more allies in the newsroom.
Sure.
Yeah, it's making it institutional. I mean, they've kind of been talking, we've been talking about this whole time, but it's the idea of working within the way that the institution works, but also changing it. It's talking, it's having panels, it's having discussions within the newsroom. It's allowing it to be part of the conversation, and I think it's easier within newsrooms because we are the ones reporting on it, so we're already discussing it. Why aren't we discussing it in regard to how we treat each other?
So we call this Power to the Interns. What is your last message of how we can empower interns?
Have conversations with one another. Be sure to set those boundaries and make them known, and give yourself that voice in order to draw attention to these issues, so that way, as someone mentioned earlier, that you can grow stronger and so can the organization overall.
Sure.
I think it's a matter of respecting them and treating them like they are real reporters, but also keeping in mind that a lot of them are still going to be students and still need that support, and provide that support for them.
I think about your group, Press Forward, and these young women. The relationship between their ambition and their courage and the work that you're going to do is really purposeful. What's your message to them?
Our message is that ambition that you have will be served safely with support and access to all that you might need and all the questions you might have. Our mission is to be a place where anyone can come find us and have all the structure they need to do what you should be able to do without a second thought, and that succeed as journalists, because we need you.
And the National Women's Law Center?
It's baked into our mission. We're here to remove barriers and promote opportunities for women and girls, so I hope you see us as a resource and a source of support.
And the EEOC?
And I would echo that and say continue to be engaged and informed and active, both as interns and then as employees and then as big bosses, and share your information with your colleagues and with your subordinates someday. And EEOC can also be a resource for you and your colleagues.
And the message from the museum is we are delighted to be a resource as well. All of the programs that we've done, starting with the university view, the employer view, and now the student view, will be available for training on this website. And we think that's really important because we know the power is shifting, and having the ability to have free resources is going to help the power shift accelerate. So on behalf of the museum, we thank you for joining us. Move forward.